Now, speaking of Labour Party policy, I've got to tackle today's discourse because it's everywhere, it's inescapable, and we have to talk about it. So I did a little bit of discussion on stream yesterday, but given how much it's taken off on social media this afternoon and yesterday, we've got to talk about private schools again. Now, what Labour Party have done is they've U-turned on their decision to get rid of the charitable status for private schools. Now, for once, I'm actually not going to attack Labour for this. I don't think it's necessarily an issue, given that they are still intending on both including VAT and school fees for private schools and making them eligible for business rates, because they have fiscal privilege in the Exchequer to do that, even without passing any kind of legislation or laws. But to be able to remove the charitable status, you actually have to go through Parliament and pass a law, which is obviously a lot of faff. Another thing as well I would like to point out, why I'm going to defend Labour's move on this one, is that one of the things that means that private schools get charitable status is because they give out bursaries. It's because that they have scholarship programs for people from disadvantaged backgrounds to get. And if you remove the charitable status, then there's no longer any need for them to do that. They might as well just focus entirely on profit. But if they still have charitable status and you're taxing them because you have the privilege, they still have to give out those bursaries and those scholarships as well. So I actually don't hate Labour's positioning on this. Now, I think as a matter of principle, I don't think that they should be charities, but as far as I'm concerned, the real issue is utility rather than kind of the nominative morality of what's going on here. I'm not really that fussed as long as we get the money from them at the end game. As long as we get the money out of these people, that's fine. But would you believe it? Would you absolutely believe it? The briefcases are mad. The briefcases are absolutely mad at the idea that their cosseted and disgusting little offspring might have to mingle with the rabble. They might have to rub shoulders with people below them on the social hierarchy, right? Now, of course, the first person to pipe up and stoke the discourse was friend of the show, Sebastian Payne, or as he is indeed known, Mr. Will Mackenzie from The In-Betweeners. And he wrote an article in the iPaper, which is so breathtakingly out of touch, I thought it was best for us to go over and dissect and explore why Mr. Private Sixth Form, not even a secondary school, just a private sixth form for 2 years, so that he could get all the connections that he needed to then be a top-tier journalist, future Tory MP potentially, and also head of think tank UK Onward, because of course that's what the money is there for. It's for connections, really and truly. It's to be part of that elite club, being part of the big club. So I'm just going to dissect the nonsense that he engages in here, because he is the worst and I hate him. So let's debunk his arguments about private schools. My mother saved for years to send me to private school. Labour's class warfare will hurt parents like her. It won't hurt parents like her, because what will happen is that the funding, the IFS have designated that's going to be around about 1.6 billion extra a year in tax revenue. That's going to go into making state schools better, right? I know you might not get the 5 times more funding per pupil for your little offspring, your little special offspring, Seb, but you will at least get better state schools. And your mum will have loads more money to spend on other things whilst we make school better for everybody, regardless of their financial background, right? The school debacle shows at heart Keir Starmer is more left than centre. I mean, this is a singular policy, but go ahead. Imagine a policy that with the stroke of a pen would pile more pressure on schools and cause fresh pain from a million parents. Oh, the pain of Tarquin having to mingle with the rabble. Oh no, my heart bleeds. It really does, right? Imagine a time when state education is overburdened and families are trying to survive this era of high inflation, doing something to actively worsen their plight. I'm sorry, if you're sending your kids to private school, you are not being affected by the cost of living crisis, right? If the cost of living crisis is biting you, so much so that you would be affected by a 20% rise on school fees, you should be prioritising feeding your children before trying to send them into the elite club of private school people. I'm sorry, get your priorities right, or indeed cancel Netflix. Forget the lattes, take a packed lunch to work. There are plenty of ways of saving, and really and truly, all of these people complaining about private school fees going up need to, at some point, decide to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and realise that maybe if they wanted to afford to send their kids to private schools, they should have been saving up for a rainy day fund. Why should the state have to pay for these people's financial profligacy? These people's failure to prepare? I'm sorry, why should I care what a bunch of rich people think about how much they're paying for private school? But anyway, this is what Labour is seeking with continued class warfare on private schools. Good. For 2 years, it's been one of Keir Starmer's flagship goals, scrapping charitable status for half of the 2,500 private schools in England and Wales, while adding 20% VAT to school fees. The pledge is one of the very few tax rises Labour has open and willingly championing, left of centre party by the way, very few tax rises. The 1.7 billion it would raise represents a new significant revenue stream. It would also one pledge that has remained consistent through all the other flip-flops Starmer has undertaken. Starmer has dropped his long-standing pledge to remove charitable status, likely fearful of years of legal wrangling. Those who advocated the shift have propagated the notion that independent schools are undeserving of such special status. True, they are not charities, they are businesses, there to make money. They're there to make money, they're there in search of profit, they serve no societal utility outside of that. They are merely, specifically, profit-seeking enterprises. There is no reason for these people being charitable status. But as long as charitable status forces them to give out scholarships and bursaries to people from underprivileged backgrounds to go there, well, clearly the charitable status does at least something useful at this point in time. But of course, there is no reason why the parents of the richest kids in the country shouldn't be paying a little bit of extra on VAT to ensure that we have properly funded state schools. I'd like to point out again, the funding per pupil in private schools is 5 times that of those in the state sector. The party is not backing away from its battle on private schools. It has stated that VAT exemption on school fees will still be scrapped within the first year of office if it wins the next election. Starmer has blithely dismissed the warnings that it may have any financial impact on parents. The notion that the school doesn't have to pass this on to the parents in fees is for the birds, and shows how little he understands the sector. They probably will pass it on to the parents, and, I don't care. I'm sorry. I just don't care. If you're the kind of person who sends your children to private school, I literally don't care about you. Tough love, is it? I could not care less about what happens to your finances, or indeed if you're forced to send your children into normal schools with normal children. I really don't care. I literally do not care. Here, I'll declare a personal interest. I attended a private sixth form for 2 years after 5 years at Gateshead Comprehensive School. As with millions of other parents across the country, my mother wanted the best possible education, concluded it would need to be paid for. It's crazy, right? It's crazy how this educational division between the funding for state schools and the funding for private schools maintains this division by ensuring that people who want to have the best life for their children feel the need to spend loads of money sending them to private school to perpetuate this continual divide. How about instead, right, we take my preferred route on this one, which is we'll ban them all together, like they do in Scandinavian countries, and get better educational output, and have people from upper classes and people from middle class, people from working classes all mixing together at the same schools so that we get less class stratification in our country, and indeed we have a more equal funding per pupil, where what kind of education you get is not indeed dependent on whether you've won the uterus lottery as far as your parents' generational wealth, right? Just because someone is born into a rich family, that does not mean that they should be entitled to a better education than everybody else. They get enough other advantages outside of education in how much money their parents have, because it's the biggest indicator of how successful that you're going to be later in life. The fact that they can then pass that down into something as very basic as education is an absolute failure of liberal democracy. It's total failure, and is another reason why we have such an entrenched class division in this country. Only 7% of children in this country go to private school, yet 51% of journalists are privately schooled. I wonder why there's been such a media backlash to this private school VAT fees, given that 51% of the people reporting on it have a vested interest in keeping the system as it is. Anyway, let's continue. Although the comprehensive I attended was ranked one of the best in the area, it still sat near the bottom quarter of national rankings. Isn't it weird how that all of this talk of levelling up, and they still won't actually deal with the issues of school funding in the north and outside of London, for example, where schools indeed are literally collapsing because of rack concrete. But Seb Payne is far more concerned with the additional hardship that's going to be faced on the top 1% and 5% for having to pay a little bit more for their costed and disgusting children's little school fees. I could only attend thanks to years of sacrifices and hard work, particularly growing up in a single-parent household. On the first day I arrived there in 2005, I was surprised to find many there were in the same situation. Now this is nonsense. This is complete lies, right? This is a graph of who goes to private school based upon their parents' wealth. You look here, right? The vast majority of people who go are in the top 5 or 1%. If you look at the top 50%, it's about 2%, literally about 2%, maybe even less than 2% as you go down. It's just absolutely predominantly the richest of the rich in this country who send their kids to private school. To try and claim, right, based on some nonsense anecdote, without providing any data, because of course the right have to rely on anecdotes, because of course they have no data, because data is a communist cabal is out to get them, right? They have no data on this, but he has plenty of anecdotes about all the people he knew from private school whose parents had to scrimp and save, rather than indeed part of the vast majority of private school pupils who were born to rich parents, because the anecdote serves his point, whereas the data goes against it. But nevertheless, I digress. It is these folks who will suffer if VAT is applied to fees, meaning the private schools risk becoming a conclave for the super rich. Higher fees will lead to two notable outcomes. Some parents will have to take their pupils out of schools and into the state sector. Fine, the state sector is going to be extra funding because of all of the taxation that's going to happen. Second, there'll be private schools that will financially struggle to survive in this new environment, adding further pressure on the state. Good. I hope the private schools end. I hope they close. I hope they get replaced by state schools with proper state funding from all of that money that we're getting from the VAT. Good. I hope that happens. Sounds fine to me. What's interesting as well is that the chance of this happening has been rebuked by the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Our best judgment is that it would be reasonable to assume that an effective VAT rate of 15% would lead to a 3 to 7% reduction in private school attendance. This would likely generate a need for about 100 to 300 million extra school spending per year in the medium to long run, which is dwarfed by the extra funding that the VAT fees would cause. And it's also worth pointing out before you say, oh, well, it might raise less if there's a drop in attendance. Well, the thing is that what they rightly point out in the IFS is that any reduced revenue from VAT and private school fees will likely be made up for by higher VAT revenues and other goods and services, holding overall consumer spending constant. If parents decide to stop paying for private school fees as a result of the extra VAT, this would release spending on fees that would be likely to be spent on other goods and services, thereby generating extra VAT revenues. So only do they say that a very, very tiny amount of people would actually stop privately attending school. There would be no change in the amount of additional revenue being taken up by the state, because the other things that they'll be spending their money on in lieu of private school fees will also have VAT attached to them most likely, so we'd still get the same amount of additional tax revenue. Labour's war on private education speaks to something deeper about its current worldview. When faced with other policies that may dilute his rather dull pursuit of power, he has junked them, but not with private schools. Starmer is pursuing this agenda and is actively willing to have the fight. At every other turn, Labour is painting itself as sensible centrists, channeling the instincts that delivered Tony Blair 3 election victories. But the school's debacle shows a Hardie is more left than centre, apparently. With so many structural and practical challenges facing the next parliament, targeting private schools is an unnecessary disruption for families and pupils. I'm sorry, right? The rest of us in normal land, right? Around normal people from normal backgrounds, right? A bunch of us normal people having to worry about putting food on the table and paying the bills, right? Normal people are not worried about whether or not Tarquin and Ophelia go to the local comprehensive, or whether they indeed go to the private school round the corner. Because of course they're not going to change. The vast majority of people are going to stay in private school, and the most people who spend private school fees will be able to afford the increase. So there's very little disruption happening here based on the actual data, Sebastian. But of course, again, you do not want to end the class divide. You benefit from the class divide now that you're part of the upper class. It's as simple as that. It was also a fundamental misreading by Labour of middle class aspiration. There is so much more to Britain's private school sector than the aristocratic aesthetics of Eton and Harrow. Everyone is in the 7% of the country that attended private school did so thanks to family wealth. But the vast majority were. The vast majority were. And again, it doesn't matter when all that extra funding is going to get put into the state sector to accommodate better provision for the people who are now on the cusp, who do indeed scrimp and save needlessly to create the educational divide. I mean, this is why the argument should be for banning private schools. This is a fine sticking plaster, lol, to remunerate some of the differences. But really and truly, private schools should be banned. They shouldn't exist. We should not be allowed to divide children based upon their parents' wealth. That should not be a thing that should happen. We should not be, because of failure to invest in the state sector, because there's too much money is going into the private sector based upon funding per pupil, we shouldn't be in the position where parents who feel like their only chance for their children to have a good shot in life is to spend all of their money and forego every luxury to send them to private school. That should not be a thing that should be happening. I will alleviate that burden by banning private schools, stopping them completely, so that no parent ever has to worry about whether or not they should be able to afford to send their kids to private school to get their kids ahead in life, because every child will be able to have to get ahead in life. And to be fair, Sebastian Payne has said one correct thing in this article. It does understand middle class aspiration, because middle class aspiration is something that I don't care about, and it's what Labour shouldn't be caring about. I know they have to care about it for electoral reasons, but Philip Proudfoot put this correctly on Twitter when he was saying the issue shouldn't be that we should always appeal to meritocracy, that we should appeal to escape the working class, right? The working class people should aspire to be middle class, rather than taking the opinion that we should make sure that the rising tide lifts all the boats, and that we raise the floor rather than raising the ceiling. Raise the floor for everybody, and that should be the true duty of a Labour Party. It should be to increase the amount that everybody gets, so that even if you don't move from working to middle class, you still have a good life, you still have a good school, you still have a good background, rather than this aspiration politics, which is all about escaping being working class rather than bringing everyone up, right? That's where the middle class aspiration politics fails, and that's why the VAT is only indeed a sticking plaster and not a panacea, which the panacea truly really is banning private schools altogether. That's very, very true. And I would also like to point out as well, it's not just Sebastian Payne who's been moaning about Labour attacking the sacred cow of private schools. Oh no. Posh boy Fraser Nelson from The Spectator, writing in The Telegraph, has also come out against the Labour plans on private schools. And apparently all worsen inequality. But the point that he brings up for worsening inequality is that the partnerships with state schools and the bursaries and things like that will go. But they won't go because they're keeping the charitable status. The charitable status relies on them forcing them to give out bursaries and scholarships to be able to advantage disadvantaged pupils. And who cares if the partnerships with state schools go, if the state schools are getting extra funding because of the increase in VAT? Like, that's just already happening. Another thing that banning private schools would do as well is that because private schools can afford to pay more, the best teachers go to private schools as well. I mean, it's not uniform in those cases, right? I mean, we've all had good and bad teachers, but it tends to be that the longer qualified, the people who've been teaching the longest with the most experience will teach in private school because they have the ability to bargain for the better money and the better salaries they'd get from private schools because they can afford them. Because again, they have more funding per pupil because of all of the rich people who spend money for that. It's pooling the money of the rich to ensure that class divide maintains the same. But of course, people like Fraser Nelson and Sebastian Payne don't care about ending the class divide. They want to continue the class divide. Now, our favourite daughter of a baron, Kirstie Allsopp, has also decided to get involved in the discussion as well because she can't help herself. She can't help but sticking her feet in it continually, over and over and over again forever, and making an absolute fool of herself on Twitter. Please remember that this debate involves children. Some of the delight being taken in the disruption of a child's life due to imposing tax on their education is disturbing. And I'm like, it's removing a tax loophole. We don't tax food apparently, but we do tax food. We do tax some things like that. If it costs a bit more, maybe the parents should give up their daily latte, find a better paying job or work a bit harder, as I was saying before. Just as if they're struggling with the cost of living or the young people who can't afford to buy a home are told. Who told them that? Uh-oh. It's the hot dog suit herself. When she literally was saying that about young people, saying they should avoid the EasyJet coffee, gym and Netflix lifestyle to be able to afford a house. Caught in 4K. Every time. There's always a tweet. There's always an article. There's always that moment where you get them. An incredible moment. But she's been banging on about it. She's been banging on about it all day, today and yesterday. And the best part, right, is that when somebody pointed out that she has a background of gigantic privilege in being the daughter of a literal baron who could put her through private school because he never had to struggle with bills growing up. Someone who's literally a member of the aristocracy, no less, trying to lecture us on, what should or shouldn't be taxed. My God, would you believe a baron might believe that there is an interest in keeping the classification of society the way that it is, between the division between middle and working class people, or indeed the upper class, which she is. She's literally a member of the aristocracy. And her actual response to being called out for being an incredibly privileged individual is telling a middle-aged woman what really matters is who her father is. Such a good way to enter a debate intelligently. #patriarchy, #everyday sexism. I tell you, we cannot trust liberals with identity politics because they just use it as a way of avoiding class politics, right? Everyone on the left, we know what we're doing because we know that it's intersectional and you need to include the class dynamic here. But the fact that she can literally use, oh, well, you're just being sexist to me by comparing me to my father, is just the worst kind of liberal id poll you've ever seen. This is the worst example of liberal id poll I've ever seen in my life, where apparently she can't be a nepo baby because she's a woman. Literally, I could do the same thing for being transgender, right? And nowhere in the actual tweet did they mention that it was somehow because she was a woman and that was related to her father, rather than just the fact that she has very rich parents. And she even lets the quiet part out loud, literally admitting that our media class is full of rich, entitled, privileged people like her who feel like they should be able to use their ill-gotten gains to be able to advantage their children who had no choice in the circumstances of their birth, to be able to give them a better start than people from poorer backgrounds, to continue the class divide, to ensure educational apartheid is continued. Incredible. Just the quiet part out loud. Us in the media class, we're better than you. Stand up for being better than everybody else, why we should be able to take our children out of regular education and put them in the special education for rich people. Flying Rodent with the base takes as always. There is some anxiety in here about the well-to-do being forced to rely upon the shrunken austerity state that was deliberately inflicted upon everyone else, and I would say this is a wonderful opportunity for those anxious people to reflect on exactly how this happened. Yeah, literally. This incredible tweet in response to someone discussing the fact that private schools or exist specifically to give the children of the rich advantages over everybody else, responded to someone saying that we should have a fairer world where everyone gets access to education. And this person literally responded with libertarian in their bio, of course. So first education, then food, and then homes. I'm just like, yeah, we should feed everyone, educate everyone, and house everyone. And he's literally doing the Lionel Hutz meme. And again, there's so many angry middle class people in the response to Tom Mills here, talking about how private schools literally, de facto, it's obvious, it's the only reason they exist is to ensure that the privileged and the wealthy can A, ensure that their children get a better education than everybody else, and B, so their children don't have to mix with people that they view as the rabble, right? That's 100% true. You cannot argue with that. People are getting so mad in the replies. All of them are this guy. All of them are this guy. All of these actually genuinely rich and privileged people who are in the upper echelons of our wage stratification in this country, who believe that they're just regular, normal people. Yeah, I earn £80,000 a year. I'm not even the top 50% of earners. They are all this man. They are all this man. Anybody getting mad at the private school fees, literally this guy. Just upper middle class people. Like, this guy's in the top 5% of earners, or at least he was in 2019. And that is the majority of people who send their kids to private school. These are the people who are getting mad about this. I have less than zero sympathy for you. Nothing at all. Again, I think we should take it away from you. You've had your fun with the private schools. There'll be no more private schools for anybody, because you clearly can't be trusted with it, because all it does is create an incredibly classist society. And of course, the last reserve of anyone is to say, oh, well, this is the politics of envy, right? They'll say, oh, you're just envious of people who go to private schools. And I'm like, yeah, I think it's correct to be envious, to be jealous of people who, through no fault of their own, through the circumstance of their birth, they have not proven any merit at all. This is not a meritocracy. This is a heritocracy. This is people inheriting wealth from people who did the work for them, who've done none of it themselves, getting a leg up because of just the circumstance of their birth. They have won the uterus lottery, and so they get to be able to enjoy a wonderful life of wealth and privilege, because we know that the educational and financial attainments of people who come out of private school dwarf those who come out of state school. Yeah, I think it's right to be jealous. I think it's right to want a more equal society and understand the lack of utility in providing this level of educational difference between people for no fault of their own. Why kids who are born into poor families should be dealing with a crumbling state sector because we've been focusing too much on private schools, because there is a division between where rich and poor people send their children. So rich people, not only do they get to pay for the better education, they're also incentivized to vote for parties who don't care about the state sector because they have no interest in doing so. Maybe we'd have better state schools if all of these rich people had to send their kids there. They had to vote for policies that made those state schools better. Maybe we wouldn't have literal schools collapsing if these rich people, these upper middle class people, actually had to have their kids go to those schools. Finland has banned private schools, result they are top of the school league tables. Exactly. But the thing is, everyone who responds to this says, oh, well, I have to send my kids to private school to get them the best start. And I'm like, why is it the best start? Why is it the best start to go to private school? Answer me this. Why are private schools better than state schools? And they can't answer it. They can't answer because they know it specifically because rich people care about them and they don't have to care about the schools that poor kids go to. And that's the true answer, right? Anytime anyone gets mad at you over the private school question, just ask them why private schools are better. Why do you want to send your kids to private school? If they admit it's because private schools are better, then they're admitting that rich people should have the ability to be able to put their kids with better education than poor kids. Simple as that.
State education is not an inferior education.
I didn't say it was.
No. So
it is an inferior education. You're arguing against your own point here. It literally is an inferior education because of underfunding, because private schools get more funding, and because there is no incentive to care about state schools when MPs don't send their kids there, and swing voters in middle class constituencies are less likely to send their kids there. Like it literally is a lesser education, and that's what we need to change. And that's why you should ban private schools so that everyone has the incentive to make the state school system as good as it possibly can be.
State education, and if more middle class families sent their children to those schools, standards go up. We know that. And
hold on, Yasmin. Yeah. Teachers at private schools potentially get paid more than teachers at state schools. The classes are smaller in private schools.
They get more attention.
They get more attention. They get more money. They get more funding. So education probably is easier to get.
And also private schools set a standard. Most people don't remember this, but one of the reasons why people choose actually to pay for education is because if you have the government that's providing a service, what are you comparing that service to? How do you know whether your education is good or not?
You have league tables.
Because it's not about league tables, because then you have to compare league tables to the likes of Finland and Sweden.
I'm sorry, I have to tell you.
There's a standard there that's been set.
Yasmin.
The education my daughter received at a private school was abominable.
Then you shouldn't have paid for it.
No, exactly. But I'm saying to you, these are some...
you may have data on this. You may have all of the actual empirical evidence on this, No Justice. But unfortunately, this person this dunderhead you're watching on TV has an anecdote, and that disproves all of the actual quantifiable data on this issue. Jesus Christ.
Assumptions that are being made that private schools are wonderful. For goodness sake, look at the Eton boys we've had who've governed us. Look at their values. Look at the way they behaved. It is not.
Yes,
it is.
They get to behave that way because they were enabled to do so by how rich their background was. Like, doesn't mean their education was worse.
Completely fake.
Okay, you're talking about education in a more all-rounded manner rather than grades.
Comparing it to Eton boys, they haven't done too badly for themselves. The vast majority go to Oxford.
Themselves.
They earn a lot of money.
The fact that so many of our PMs have gone to private school, have gone to a single university out of a very small number of people who enter private school, like the private school to PM pipeline is so obvious, that That's literally disproving your own point. The fact that you can just go to private school and that drastically increases your chances of being a politician, of being a prime minister, of being a journalist, of being a medical professional, of being a high-ranking officer in the armed forces, right? All these different parts of society that get cultural value associated with them are far more likely to be people from private school backgrounds. It literally disproves your own point here. Oh my god. They need to invite me on these shows. Channel 5, like Jeremy Vine, Storm Huntley, Alexis Conran. If you're watching, please get me on your shows. Please, please. I'm desperate. I'm desperate to increase the caliber of guests that you have on your show. Jesus Christ. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.